Imagine this for a second. You've maxed out all your credit cards. You're drowning in debt. But instead of cutting back or finding a new job, you decide to lend yourself the money to pay them off. It sounds absurd, right? That kind of circular logic would bankrupt anyone in months. Yet that's exactly how the United States government keeps its finances running. Washington borrows money by selling bonds, promises to repay later with interest. And then, through the Federal Reserve, it buys those same bonds with money that didn't exist the moment before. It's as if the government is paying itself with invisible money. But that illusion, that carefully managed loop, is the foundation of the modern global economy. The question isn't whether it's clever, it's how long it can last before trust fades and the illusion breaks. At its heart, the U.S. government bond is nothing more than an IOU, a simple promise from the Treasury. Lend us your money now, and we'll pay you back with interest later. For over 2 centuries, that promise has been enough to keep the American engine running. The U.S. has spent far more than it's collected in taxes almost every year, yet investors around the world still line up to buy its debt. Why? Because they believe it's safe. They believe in the full faith and credit of the United States. This faith-based system began long ago. After the Revolutionary War, the young nation was buried in unpaid bills, debts to soldiers, suppliers, and allies like France. Alexander Hamilton, the first Treasury Secretary, had a radical idea. Instead of erasing those debts, the U.S. would embrace them. He issued new government bonds to honor the old ones, proving the nation would always keep its word. That single decision changed everything. It restored trust, attracted investors, and locked the United States into a permanent cycle. Borrowing, repaying, and borrowing again. Debt became not a sign of weakness, but a symbol of power. A century later, in 1913, the United States created the Federal Reserve, a central bank designed to keep the system from collapsing under its own weight. Before the Fed, America's financial world was chaotic. Panics, bank runs, collapses every few years. The Fed's mission was simple: stability. But it quickly became more than that. It became the government's silent partner in managing debt. When World War II erupted, Washington needed unthinkable sums to fund the war effort. So the Fed made a quiet promise. It would buy as many government bonds as necessary to keep interest rates low. In other words, the U.S. had guaranteed demand for its debt. The central bank could simply create money, buy treasuries, and keep the machine humming. Then came 1971, the year everything changed. Until then, every U.S. dollar was backed by gold. Foreign governments could, in theory, trade their dollars for real metal stored in Fort Knox. But by the late 1960s, America's spending on the Vietnam War and social programs had ballooned so much that confidence in the dollar began to crumble. So President Richard Nixon made a historic move. He ended the gold standard. Overnight, the dollar was no longer tied to anything physical. From that moment on, America's money was backed only by belief. Belief that others would continue to trust it. The illusion became global. Here's how it works today. The U.S. Treasury needs money because the government always spends more than it earns. So it issues bonds, promises to repay in the future. Those bonds are sold to a mix of buyers: foreign governments, pension funds, banks, insurance companies. They buy them because treasuries are considered the safest asset on earth. But when demand slows down, the Federal Reserve steps in. It doesn't raise taxes, doesn't pull from savings. It simply creates new money, digitally, and uses it to buy treasuries. Numbers appear on a screen, and suddenly the government has fresh funds to spend. This isn't theory. It's been done again and again. After the 2008 financial crisis, the Fed launched quantitative easing, a fancy term for printing trillions to buy bonds and stabilize markets. During the pandemic, it did the same on an even larger scale. That's how stimulus checks were paid for. That's how bailouts happened. The US effectively bought its own debt. To most people, this sounds like wizardry, a trick that defies common sense. How can a country just create money and call it wealth? The answer is simple. It can, but you pay the price. Every new dollar created to buy government debt makes every existing dollar worth a little less. That's inflation, the invisible tax that eats away at your paycheck and your savings. It's not collected through the IRS. It's collected every time you go to the store and find that prices have quietly crept higher. This is how the bond trick works. Politicians get to spend without raising taxes. Banks and investors get liquidity and rising asset prices. The Federal Reserve keeps the system stable, and ordinary people lose a fraction of their purchasing power year after year. The U.S. national debt now exceeds $30 trillion, and it's still climbing. For decades, foreign governments like China and Japan eagerly financed that debt by buying treasuries. But that trust is beginning to fade. Both countries have started reducing their holdings. As foreign demand weakens, America becomes more reliant on its own central bank, meaning more money creation, more inflation pressure, and more risk if confidence ever cracks. Because once trust goes, the illusion goes with it. And history shows exactly how that story ends. The US isn't the first to play this game. Every great empire has used debt to expand its reach. Britain financed its navy and colonies through mountains of bonds. Until after World War II, when the pound lost its dominance and the empire faded. France tried similar financial acrobatics in the 1700s to fund its wars. It ended in bankruptcy, riots, and revolution. Debt can build empires, but when the trust runs out, it destroys them too. For now, the United States has one extraordinary advantage: the dollar itself. It's the world's reserve currency. Oil, global trade, and financial reserves are all priced in dollars. That means the world needs US debt to keep functioning. The system feeds itself. America issues bonds, the world buys them, and the dollar stays on top. It's a self-reinforcing cycle of trust. But lately, that trust has been showing cracks. Countries in the BRICS bloc are seeking alternatives. Central banks are quietly hoarding gold, and talk of de-dollarization, replacing the dollar's global role, grows louder each year. If that confidence breaks, the bond trick stops working overnight. This isn't just a story about governments and central banks. It's about your life, your grocery bill, your mortgage, your savings account. Every time the US borrows more and the Fed prints money to buy that debt, your dollars lose a bit of value. It's a slow erosion of purchasing power, a silent transfer of wealth from the middle class to those who own assets that rise with inflation. That's why inflation feels like theft. Because in a way it is. History is filled with warnings. In 1920s Germany, printing money to pay off war debts led to hyperinflation so extreme that people needed wheelbarrows of cash to buy bread. The 1970s, after Nixon cut the gold link, the dollar plunged and Americans lined up for gas under double-digit inflation. And in recent years, after endless rounds of quantitative easing, we're seeing the same symptoms: rising prices, housing bubbles, unstable markets. The biggest danger isn't just inflation, it's fragility. If global trust in US Treasuries fades, America will be forced to finance its own debt internally. That means even more dependence on the Fed, more money creation, more inflation, and more pressure on ordinary Americans. And if confidence in the dollar itself ever cracks, the entire global system, The empire of IOUs could shake to its core. That's why this bond trick matters. It's not about numbers on a government spreadsheet. It's about understanding how power and money intertwine, how debt sustains the illusion of prosperity, and how the cost is quietly passed to everyone else. Debt isn't partisan. It doesn't care who's in office. It's the hidden engine that keeps the system running, until the engine finally stalls. So what can you do? Educate yourself. Understand how inflation works. Own things that hold value when paper loses it. Because when the illusion falters, it won't be Washington or Wall Street that pays the price. It will be you. History doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. Britain's empire ran on bonds until trust collapsed. France's did too until revolution tore it apart. And now America's turn has come. The only question left is when history doesn't repeat exactly, but it rhymes. And if you fail to learn, you'll pay the price.